You know, a cool thing about all this, I talk whitetail, and I hope you guys realize or have noticed that I do talk about wildlife a lot, and that goes back for years. A lot of times I hit that with pheasants when it comes to CRP and whitetails. Most CRP mixes and pheasant mixes are pretty bad for pheasants, let alone deer. And you see those going hand in hand, let alone rabbits. And I've noticed that for many years. I've seen many clients convert their CRP, pay back taxes, put it into actual wildlife habitat, because most CRP mixes are not. They're just ground cover for an idle farm field that you can convert back to farming someday. But don't let anyone ever tell you that it's great wildlife habitat, because typically it's laying on the ground from November to March. And if there's no cover from November and March, you know, game species, including whitetails, they're not dying in June and July and August for lack of cover or food. They're dying in December, especially January, February, and March due to lack of cover especially. And then of course a lack of food. So whitetails and wildlife, pretty cool, because if you have a great wildlife parcel, you probably have a great whitetail parcel. If you have a great whitetail parcel, you're gonna have great wildlife. Now the mix, my favorite mix right here, and you could even add bobwhite quail to that. I've seen that down in southern Indiana, southern Ohio, locations that have that ultra diversity mix, and they're in that, I would say, more like upper Midwest, where you start to be able to have a sustainable population of bobwhite. I've seen bobwhite in the Thumb area of Michigan, for example, back in the late 80s, early 90s. I didn't even know what they were, and see a little covey go by. But that's when they had more fence rows, and they had more habitat to sustain those quail. They don't now. And again, it goes back to, if there's no cover, if there's no standing cover, November, December, January, February, March, then it isn't cover at all, no matter what label was put on it, who sold it to you, and how much you paid for the mix. What I find, whitetails and wildlife, obviously a great sign if you have one and you'll have the other, but there's two extremes. You know, we talk about there's not a lot of wildlife that can hold in conifer. Now the Keebler's warbler, I believe that it's in jack pine plantings in Michigan. Very rare bird that needs huge areas. And thankfully, that's why we have public land, commercial properties, because a bird like that can live and actually be included in that rotation of timber, so they have that magical age. And I don't know the exact age, but let's say it's between 20 years old and 50 years old that bird needs for sustainable population. And it's similar to grouse. Once that aspen reaches a certain age, let's say 10 to 15 years old or older, then you find that it's not quality habitat for grouse in aspen cuttings. And so they need a certain sweet spot. Grouse are a little bit easier to manage. They could live in a very tight area, small window. And when you need to manage large tracts of pines for a single game species within a certain couple decades or 3 decades of growth, you need a lot of space for something like that. But bottom line, whether it's all pines, all spruce, all shrubs, all grass, all hardwoods, a monoculture equals a very low value of habitat for wildlife. And it could be shrubs. You know, shrubs might give cover, they might have more food, they might give sustainable cover during the wintertime, so they might do a little bit better than conifers would, and depending on the shrub, far better than hardwoods or conifer at monocultures, even grasslands. And so all those monocultures, sometimes they relate to one wildlife species that does well, but a lot of times they only relate to one that does well. And that's the bad thing. When you have diversity, when you have an upland setting, when you have an uneven canopy, I try to teach that all the time. So you have giant hardwoods here, it goes down to pines, goes down to shrubs, grasses, up to pines, back down to grasses. When you have an uneven canopy, that really just right off the bat tells you the potential of the amount of wildlife and type of wildlife species you're going to have on the property. You want diversity, and for that you get a lot of wildlife, and of course you get great whitetail cover. The true test on any property. Now I talk about your hunting test and how you're doing is if you have a very defined doe movement on your property, that you can say, I'm going to go shoot that 8-year-old doe, and you go out there, and because you've managed a habitat or scouted well on public land, you can see that same movement from that same doe family group every single day, and it's easy to capitalize on when you go out and hunt. But really the true test of how attractive your land is how many different wildlife species are on your property. Again, I love this mix. I love rabbits, grouse, turkeys, pheasants. And you find with diversity on a whitetail property, you hit every one of those. And that's a really cool thing. And so I want to enjoy my property for all forms of wildlife. I love seeing pheasant out here. We saw pheasant in the spring. Everything we're doing with the switchgrass lines and screening actually promotes that opportunity for pheasants and gives them that sustainable wildlife cover. Because if there's not switchgrass around here, they're dying for the most part. They have no cover during the wintertime. They die. They have no tunnels that they can build in through the grasses because any other grass lies down. We've had a lot of pheasant work within 5 miles of us right here, with even in 2 miles. And they planted, I'm not kidding, they planted thousands of pheasants on various pheasant mixes and CRP mixes. And guess what? I would say 99.9% are all dead. They're just not there. So one of the true tests is how inclusive your land is to all wildlife species, and that'll actually promote a great whitetail parcel. So after you have that true test, it tells you a lot of different wildlife species on your land. That'll tell you have a great whitetail parcel. Great whitetail parcels have to have a lot of different wildlife species because that equals diversity. So the next step, Ariana. So Ariana, she just walked in. I'm gonna pick on her for a second. She came in, she was making noise and bothering us all. But Ariana is my stepdaughter, Diane's daughter, my daughter, and she's gonna start working for us. And so what that means is she's really gonna attack and work with our partnership base, and you're gonna help Diane make sure that she calls and contacts every potential client that comes our way. Yes. We get so many, we're gonna turn away a couple thousand this year, and so hiring Ariana to come on board was a big step, and part of that is to help manage our clients, and you can't wait to be on camera again, right?
So excited.
Yeah. So Ariana, my daughter, she's going to be starting with the company, and you might hear her name from time to time, so I wanted to introduce her to you. And she just walked in, and she was disturbing us, so we had to embarrass her. And do you want to talk about buying, finding, and leasing the perfect whitetail and wildlife parcel, or do you want to go do what you're doing? And
I think I'll go talk to clients.
Okay. Thanks, R.
Yeah.
So really, buying, finding, and leasing land, think about that when you're looking for your next parcel, when you're considering your next spot to hunt on public land. How much diversity does it have? Is it a monoculture? I know some big pine plantings up in the UP in Michigan, even hardwoods along Lake Superior, in the Lake Superior shoreline, and horrible monocultures that don't have a lot of deer, but they don't have a lot of wildlife. So really thinking about this, if you're looking for your next property, trust me, you can turn around a property in 1 year, 1 season, 1 summer, and make it an outstanding whitetail parcel. We dropped into this parcel in Minnesota, made a lot of changes, changed how the way the land was hunted, added food sources, switchgrass, and we're adding cuttings this off season, but we were able to harvest our target bucks, have a great season, and it's something you can do quickly if you have the right pieces in place. And I'm not talking about food plot is here, bedding area is here, and you have a stand in between, you go sit in it. I'm talking about, we added 15 different stands here, removed every blind, we did everything different for how we hunted this land. And if you have the right pieces, you can enjoy a great hunt in less than 1 season, and you can build that quickly. Build this, attack it. If you look at, I have a hardwood 40-acre parcel. Get someone to cut it now. Don't wait 2 or 3 years. Sometimes a forest will say, well, let's put it up on bid. Let's give them 18 months or 12 months to cut it. No, you want to cut it now. Look at it like you might lose this property in 2 years. You might lose your job. You might change your career. You might want something else. Look at it and join the property right away, because the faster you make these improvements that lead to more diversity on the land, including cutting hardwoods, adding conifers, making clearings for switchgrass, making clearings for food plot, improving your access. If you can afford to do that all in 1 year, I'd rather see you buy a small property that you can afford to change in 1 year than a big property that takes 10 years because you stretch your resources too thin to get a hold of that big parcel. Always better to be able to grab a smaller parcel. And the same goes for ag land. If you're managing 20 acres of ag land out of 80 acres and 40 acres of ag overall, 80-acre parcel, and you have to just let that 20 acres of ag sit there while you rent it to pay the bills, I'd rather see you buy a 60-acre piece where you have total control of the ag land you're buying, make the changes right now, live within your budget, know that you're gonna spend a lot of resources of time and money to change that parcel to get the diversity you need. But I encourage clients when I leave, almost all of them, I say, you do the work, right? Diane will even say, do you think you're going to do the work? Because I'd say 15-20% of the clients I go to, I don't think they're going to do the work because they didn't realize what it would take to actually change the property. And it's not just the habitat, it's changing their hunt. So they always like this stand where Uncle Larry shot a booner 20 years ago. It's never panned out since, but they have that history with it. I go in with a blank slate. I look at it black and white. You can't hunt that stand anymore because it's in a bad spot. And sometimes those habits are the hardest to break when it comes to changing a whitetail property to produce wildlife and whitetails quickly. I encourage people to do as much work as they humanly can possible the first year and then just look at they can't wait to relax in hunting season and beyond, and then it's more maintenance mode. But build it, attack the plan, change the diversity, and you'll notice a lot of wildlife along with whitetails. Number 5, do you have butterflies, birds, and bees? Because if you do, then that's going to tell you a lot about the parcel. Obviously, if you're going into a stand of hardwoods, you might have certain hardwood-specific birds, but the butterflies and bees need a lot of open ground, open areas, forbs, forages, flowers, grasses, and that's why they call it pollinator blends that you can plant. Planting all pollinator blends, very bad. Repeat that again. All pollinator blends, for how expensive they are, they're not the be-all, end-all. You have to have that sustainable cover, whether it's switchgrass, shrubs, whatever it is next to that pollinator blend, you have to have sustainable cover. In fact, I like to surround that pollinator blend because that pollinator blend equals forage. It equals cover and food for birds, butterflies, and bees, but you have to have that cover. So if you just have birds, butterflies, and bees during the summertime, don't pat yourself on the back because you can't have any small game species like pheasants, rabbits, quail, let alone whitetails. So make sure you have that. When we came out here to Minnesota, something that was really cool around our house, they have a lot of pollinator blends that were planted in CRP mixes years ago. No deer staying out here, no food for deer, no food for pheasants, no real cover for pheasants. But boy, we could sit there and hear all the birds and see butterflies. The fireflies at night, just incredible. And so we're complementing that with heavy switchgrass lines. So we actually have solid switchgrass here that can stand up all winter. And then we have the pollinator blends here that provide food and forage for all kinds of critters. And we can have that perfect mix. So great sign on a great property when you not only have these small game species, but when you have butterflies, bees, and birds as well. Number 6, always remember mono is bad. So whether you're buying a parcel, you're trying to make over a parcel, or you're just looking for a spot to hunt on public land, avoid those large tracts of pines, large areas of hardwoods. Really focus on the change, the location between hardwoods and conifer. Add in low elevation, high elevation in that same location, meaning upland, lowland, swamp cover, various ages of habitat, including age of hardwoods, where there's been clearings or cuttings versus monoculture, big hardwoods. Look for that difference. Do something the opposite of mono, and you'll find that for any species, you're going to find a much better wildlife population and a more blend of wildlife species, which is always a lot of fun. And always remember, if you hit the bullseye for whitetails, then you're going to encompass the majority of the wildlife species you seek, because whitetails are creatures of edge, they're creatures of diversity, and that encompasses and pulls in a lot of other wildlife species. I see that in client parcels all the time. One of my favorite, I tell you about Bill about 2 years ago, when he sent me a text that he actually saw pheasants on his land. And it was after we converted most of the CRP and native grass plantings to switchgrass. It was after we moved clusters of conifers around. He did that with a tree spade, an old Christmas tree farm. He allowed willows, and at that time he's got autumn olive on his property, whether you like it or not. Lots of berries, lots of bird cover. So he ended up with a diverse parcel with solid patches of switchgrass that protected small game species through the entire winter. The native grass had laid down. It wasn't even offering cover for him to get in and out of stands in central Michigan. And with Bill, it was one thing him seeing a pheasant the one year. It was another thing when he heard up to 6-7 roosters and saw a bunch of hens when he was out on the property a couple falls ago. And that's when you know that your whitetail land is really kicking, and Bill has had a phenomenal whitetail parcel in central Michigan. I might highlight that sometime. He's already told me I could. You know, we wouldn't discuss roads, last names, locations, but he's got a pretty cool parcel. And the thing about Bill is he attacks his plan. He's added other parcels to his land, but he attacks what I ask him to do and recommend within a few months of me being there, and then he's finished and he wants more. So I've been to his property, I think 6 times over the last 8 years. So been a great client, and great client that I consider a friend, but at the same time, he's attacked his plan, he's worked hard, and I love seeing the rewards of his work and the success he's had every single year. Think about it, whitetails and wildlife, really good combination, and it's almost like you can't have one without the other. Now, as we transition into habitat season, I hope you've had a chance to check out my web class, How to Design Your Whitetail Parcel. It's on my website, whitetailhabitatsolutions.com. I have a link in the description, and I hope you can find it, check it out, and enjoy it this year.